The February 27th, 2008 meeting of the Los Gatos Planning Commission to order. I'm Joanne Talasfor, Chair of the Planning Commission, and I and my fellow commissioners welcome you. The Planning Commission is composed of citizens appointed by the Town Council to review planning and development issues and to make decisions and recommendations to the town regarding land use both for residential and commercial. And as we hear discussion tonight, we will consider each proposal, except for tonight we have one, and evaluate how it supports and enhances the high quality of life we enjoy in Los Gatos. And our actions, of course, are guided by the town's general plan policy, zoning codes, and other standards and guidelines that have been adopted by the Town Council. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting. A reminder for all of us to silence our cell phones. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Suda, with that, would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Machichi.
Here.
Commissioner Bourgeois.
Here.
Commissioner Rice.
Here.
Commissioner Sayoc.
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Here.
Vice Chair Kane.
Here.
And Chair Talasfor.
Here. And Commissioner Sayoc, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Commissioners, I'll need I'll need a motion to approve the minutes of January 23rd.
So moved.
Commissioner Kane has, thank you, a motion seconded by Commissioner O'Donnell. Thank you. And Commissioner Machichi, you have a comment.
Yeah, on the Santa Cruz Ave and Mulder Avenue application, the minutes state that I used amender as a precedent. If you recall, then I withdrew that.
Where are you?
It says that you withdrew it.
Where?
It's in here, Phil. It's amended.
Keep going down.
Excuse me. Where are you? Okay.
It's on page 5.
Oh, down here. Oh, okay.
You amended the motion to remove
Very
it.
good. Never mind.
Commissioner, all right, Commissioner Kane and
okay.
Commissioner Rice remembered that you did remove it, and it's reflected in the minutes. Is that correct?
It is.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? None. Motion carries 7-0. All right, thank you. We have no written communications or requested continuances. Do we have any reports from our subcommittees? Was there a historic that met this last time? No. All right, seeing, there was.
Excuse me.
Historic?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Machichi.
I'm so busy studying for tonight. It just absorbs all of me.
I understand, but we're looking forward to hearing about the report from Historic. Thank you.
Anyway, there are a number of items. The most important one was the lot of land on there used to be the convalescent home on Great Plain Avenue. The trash house, historic, came under historic purview. Even though we were only looking at that home and the 3 homes on the side street, we did make other comments. They reduced our request from 28 sites down to 21 sites. We approved everything that they had done. They did a beautiful job on the trash house itself. You'll see it when it comes there. However, they put a 2B MP units on the corner as a duplex. And we approved it to come up here, but we suggested that they find another place on the site for that and do something else on the corner, which they seemed amenable to. That was it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Do we have questions? Commissioner Kane?
Commissioner Machichi,
Yes.
did you have the benefit of the prior hearing on this house for the Historic Preservation Committee for that?
No, I did not. But I did see the original plans and went over and the original home was not to anybody's liking, and they redid it quite a bit.
I think you're referring to the conceptual, the CDAC committee conceptual.
Talking about HPC.
Oh,
We
they
heard
have-
this one before,
Yeah.
and they
Oh,
came
I
with
see.
an...
It was 28 homes. They had put an add-on on the trash house that the historic committee didn't like, and they redid it.
Commissioner Rice?
My recollection as well was that it was CDAC, not HPC.
Right.
At least I never heard it on HPC. I do recall hearing it on CDAC.
Yes, so did I, and it did come before us, but you didn't get those minutes. I wonder if we should,
No, it was before the historic committee before.
oh, it was there.
I just said that.
All right. Okay, thank you. All right, well, we'll look forward
It
to...
was the second time, back.
Okay. We'll look forward to seeing it.
They did a nice job.
Yep, okay, good. All right, thank you very much. Members of the audience, as is your right, you have two opportunities to speak, both before the public hearing and during the public hearing. And if you would please fill out the gray speaker cards that you'll find behind the seats and then hand them over to staff. I'll get them and then I can call on your name. And we're at that point in the meeting now where we have verbal communications from the audience, and so my first speaker card is for Citizen Ray.
We should count walk time.
Is We'll exchange that one for one that does work over here. Thank you for your patience. It hasn't started yet.
All right. Yes, nice to see you all. First off, a copy of the Metro of last week, for those of you who have not read the key article, okay? It's entitled Skate Park Sabotage, with a question mark. And I'm going to submit this as evidence for each one of you to read if you haven't seen it. And it clearly states the questions that we have about the criminality that occurred in the town clerk's office, okay, when the petitions were duplicated and passed out to members of the opposition. Clearly states the question mark. Was there complicity with others? Was there a group complicity on the whole matter? Were there senior advisors involved? We, the people of the community, deserve these answers from the Government Integrity Unit of the District Attorney's Office. So I'll give this to Ms. Humboldt right now. Yes. Second item, just to bring you up to date. I understand that the Ross Creek neighbors and environs have filed their lawsuit against the city, I presume, okay? This took place last week. So I guess we'll be going down the path to see who was right, the town council or the neighbors. Won't it be interesting? Yes, indeed. Lastly, those of us who supported Yes on D, skate park for the kids, very disgruntled, because out of 11 people that voted, 7 voted against it and 4 voted for it. What a huge disappointment that 7 out of 11 would vote to leave the kids of Los Gatos who use skateboards in the mean streets of Los Gatos as the relatively only place to do their thing, okay? It speaks to in my opinion, to the fact it's How can any person who has any kind of a social conscience vote no on that issue, vote against the kids? Blows my mind. The only answer that I can think of is that the people of Los Gatos were so confused with all the lies, frauds, misinterpretation, misrepresentation, all the garbage that those 3 members of the town council put out to confuse everybody, and they did.
Thank you. Thank you. Your time's up. Okay, commissioners, with that, we're going to go, the audience, by the way, will have another opportunity to speak during the public hearing if they would care to. That's all the speaker cards I have at the present time. We have nothing on the consent calendar and not any continued public hearing, so we're going to go right to our new public hearing, which is our single-family and two-family residential design guidelines. And that is application zoning, or for our audience members who may be watching on television, I'm going to read some of this just in case they're not familiar with it. It's long, so I'm going to try to edit it, but the application is for a zoning ordinance amendment A-08-001 and applications, historic district designation applications HD 0801, HD 0802, HD 0803, and HD 0804. And the applicant is the town of Los Gatos. And this is for our new residential design guidelines. And with that, I think I will just turn this over to Mr. Suda for introduction to us.
Okay, I'll have a few brief introductory comments, and sitting to my right, as you know, is the town's consulting architect, Larry Cannon, who will also provide an overview of the draft document tonight. The item before you tonight is the latest draft of the residential design guidelines. As you know, this is a project that's been underway for about 2.5 years. During that time, staff, Mr. Cannon, and the town's general plan committee have been working on numerous drafts of this document, and the GPC has reviewed or has had meetings on the guidelines 13 times over that 2.5 year period, and finally culminated earlier this year in January with their recommendation for approval of the document that you have in front of you. Fundamentally, this effort is an opportunity to provide much more detail on the town's expectations and requirements for design of single-family and two-family homes in the community. It also, from an organizational standpoint, seeks to merge the town's pre-1941 guidelines and the town's residential development standards into one comprehensive set of standards that covers all residential development in the town. And then lastly, it takes the design guidelines that are currently contained in each one of those historic district ordinances and also puts that into the residential design guidelines. So it really seeks to consolidate all that information, all the town standards on new homes into one document. And with that, I'm going to ask Larry to provide an orientation or an overview of the document.
We'll try. Am I on here? Okay. No. Okay. I will try to be brief on it. The document is, in many ways, a companion piece to what you adopted not too long ago, which is the commercial design guidelines, and so it is in that same flavor, and I'll describe that in just a moment. It has been a long process. Normally, we think something going on this long for a design guideline document means it's a real problem. But in this case, I don't think it has been. It's been around long enough. There have been so many people who have contributed to it and looked at it and offered advice. I think it'd be hard to go through here and know and put your finger in any one page and say this came from one person or another. It's just been a real collaborative effort. We started this the same way we started the commercial design guidelines, in the sense of starting out trying to be pretty clear about what the purpose was, which is in here, and then also community expectations. Every community has a different standard of what they expect in the way of residential development from development community, from individual homeowners. And so that was really where this thing started, saying here's what we, as the town of Los Gatos, feel we should be able to expect because we have such a special place. So that's kind of the underpinning of it. The document is, although it's got a lot of pages in it, basically is just organized into three major sections: the neighborhood patterns, which deal with the layout of lots and how individual homes relate to their neighbors; building design; and historic resources, which is folded in, most of it taken from the existing ordinances for historic districts, but put in here hopefully in a much more readable and understandable manner. The way the document is put together is that it's the intent that someone who picked this up, whether it be a homeowner or whether it be a design professional hired by the homeowner, can go through and by reading the numbered bold point headlines, like in street presence, there are only 4 under there, and
What
most
page
of
are you on?
I'm on
Excuse me,
page, I'm
Forrest.
sorry, page 14, just as
Okay.
an example.
Thank you.
Almost all of these have a major category like street presence, and then have maybe 3, 4, not much more than that, major numbered guidelines under that. The intent is that somebody who picked this up could go through here and by reading those highlights and by reading the sidebars would have a really pretty good idea of what's going to be expected of them. And then they can go back and the bullet points are more detail and they're examples and that. So it's intended to be highly readable, be easy to understand, and be able to get the main points across pretty quickly. And for that reason, we have pulled out several items as sidebars. Those are either sidebars that are important items that I want to make sure we highlighted. There are also other items that during the course of the staff or committee thought should be included, but if we stuck it in the text of it, would really reduce the readability and would just make this thing long. We've also tried, to the maximum degree you can, pulling additional information out and putting it in appendices so that that doesn't, again, bog down the readability. It's there if you need it. And I think the last point I would speak to before I just give it back to you is the How to Read Your Neighborhood Workbook. I mean, I think when we start, I've done residential design guidelines before, and they're never easy, but I think particularly in Los Gatos, as we got together as a general plan committee, it was so hard. Everybody realized it was so hard because there were so many different conditions, and any time you sort of stated the guideline, everybody could think of 6 or other places in different neighborhoods where it might not apply. So we did 2 things. We've developed some general design principles in here, overall, and then for the neighborhood, and then for the building design, with the idea that you can't write guidelines that will cover everything. And so there are always those sort of linchpins to go back to if we don't have a specific guideline. And in the course of that, as we were trying to figure out how to really get our arms around it, or teeth into the guidelines, this How to Read Your Neighborhood workbook was put together and tested on the general plan committee and changed as a basis of that. But the rationale behind it was, and it was partially, maybe how I go out and look at a review situation. But number one, when I started as town consulting architect, I met with every planning commissioner and city council person, and the instructions that were given very clearly by everyone was neighborhood compatibility and design excellence were the 2 keys. And so this workbook is intended to deal with the issue of neighborhood compatibility. And I think the problems that I find in most of the reviews I do, whether it's here or someplace else, and perhaps you've found the same, is one of the biggest problems is an applicant possibly will come in and have an idea of what they want, but it has nothing to do with the neighborhood. They've got a dream, perhaps, but they haven't looked at the neighborhood very seriously, and mostly applicants who are not design professionals probably wouldn't think of the things to look for. So this was intended to sort of help in that. It's an educational thing, and it's also one in here that would, although it doesn't state it explicitly, but I think it's in here that if you come in with something that's totally different from the neighborhood and you sort of looked at here and maybe you've marked this thing up if you've used it and you see no examples of something. And so I think it's a notice of saying if you really want to do something that's totally out of the nature of what's happening in the neighborhood, you're going to have to justify it. You're going to have to explain it. help us to believe in what you want to do. Otherwise, you're going to be better off to be neighborhood compatible by at least starting here. And the whole idea of this, too, is hopefully this will give some standard frame of reference for staff, for Planning Commission to review projects, and if applicants have looked at this and understood it, that perhaps they'll come in with applications that will be easier to approve and speed up the process. So, Randy, I'll turn it back to you. I'm available for any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Randy, do you have anything to add to that? Mr. Suda? No. Commissioners, I wanted to draw your attention one more time to our agenda tonight. And under new public hearings number 1, there's an A, a B, and a C. And for your information, A and C have to be passed together, okay? B, however, is a separate issue. That's more of a process issue. So what I would like to do is really try to thoroughly discuss A, which is the design guidelines, and have a robust discussion about that, and have that somehow. Can we do this? That's right, Mr. Suda. We can bundle A and C together, or how would you suggest doing that?
Well, preferably if we can keep all of these together. That would be our preference.
Right.
But if you make it through 2 of the 3, A and C must go together.
Okay.
Because
yes.
A is the actual guidelines. The individual design guidelines that were in each of those historic ordinances now get folded into the guidelines, and therefore they're coming out of the ordinances. C are the ordinance changes to put those into the guidelines. Okay, so A and C must go together. B, as you said, are HPC's recommended changes to the process.
Okay. But we should decide on all of it tonight, if possible.
Well, I think
I
think the best way to handle it is to complete your discussion on all 3 elements, whether you do it tonight or in multiple nights, but don't make a recommendation to council regarding any one of the 3 until you're ready to make a recommendation on all 3.
All 3, okay.
And combine your public hearing for all 3. That way you're not holding serial public hearings and so on.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. All right, Commissioners, with that, does anyone have a question of Mr. Cannon at this time, or staff? Yes. Commissioner Rice.
Question of staff, which is, excuse me, once adopted and approved by the council, what is the process for amending or changing this document?
You're talking about the design guidelines?
Yes.
The process for changing it would be the same one that it's going through currently. We'd take it to the General Planning Committee with any recommended changes. They would make a recommendation, Planning Commission would hold a public hearing, and ultimately would get forwarded back to Town Council.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. So with that, I'm hoping that we have a robust discussion tonight. It's a big document. It's 89 pages. It's very important. It's been seen by the General Plan Committee 13 times over 2.5 years. Lots of input there, rewrites. It's been seen by Historic Preservation. Staff has reviewed it, and certainly Mr. Cannon's been very involved in it. And now it's our turn to be involved in it. And I'm hoping we do I know you've taken time to read through it, and I would like tonight to do another thorough discussion and be as meticulous about it as possible. So how do we discuss this? What I would like to suggest is that, laborious as it may seem, that we go through this perhaps chapter by chapter. And when we have issues, and I hate to do it page by page, but it may end up being that way. But if what we could do at the top of the discussion of each chapter, I would ask if you have areas of concern or issues that you'd like to discuss, raise your hand and we'll mark it down so we don't forget it. And then we could just start in on those general areas, unless somebody has a better idea about this. But that's what I would like to do, and my hope is that we can get through all of it, certainly begin it anyway, or get through 3 chapters. There is another thing I wanted to clarify, and that is, I don't want to hear edits tonight. Editing procedures really should be offline, and I've talked with Mr. Suda, and if I found some, and I'm sure you have too in your readings, and if you wanted to give those offline to staff, they'll take care of it. I'm talking about, moving over lines, periods, misspelling words, pardon me? Wordsmithing, things like that. So, Commissioner Commissioner O'Donnell?
I have obviously no objection to following on a page-by-page basis. I'm just, as a matter of consideration, I'm just wondering if that is the most expeditious way to do it. And let me just finish what I'm saying. Some of us have been studying this thing for 2.5 years because we've been on the various committees that did it. Others perhaps have not done it as many times, but I'm convinced that they've done it very thoroughly, preparatory for tonight. If you think that will be the best way to do it is page by page, that's fine. I just suggest to you that if we did it perhaps by asking people for particular comments, as we move chapter by chapter, it might have a greater likelihood of being finished in a reasonable time, but that's just a question.
When I do want to do it chapter by chapter, but I said if that means that we have to turn a page by page, we have to do that. On the other hand, what I wanted to hear from you is when we talk about, like the chapter, and the first one will be introduction, if you have certain areas, please let me know now so I mark them down and we make sure that we cover them. That's what I meant. And if it means that, and I would like to do it in some kind of order. In other words, how to read your neighborhood, I would rather discuss in Chapter 1 before we discuss avoid structures with height and bulk and front mass issues. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it flows better for the discussion, and that's what I meant. Is that agreeable?
It's fine with me.
Okay. So, that being said, introduction is our first chapter. And who would have some areas that they would like us for sure to get to? Oh, wait, I don't have any speaker cards on this either, by the way. Do we do our discussion first and then open it up? How should we do this tonight?
Well, you have the option. This is an application before the town for a zone change. Normally, you hear from the applicant, you ask any questions that you have, which sounds like you've already done, and then you hear from the public. And so I think this is as good a time as any to invite the public up to speak.
Okay.
And at the conclusion of that public hearing, you can close the public hearing and go ahead with your discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
I would like to hear the discussion, then I would talk. I want to talk.
I think we were going to go in the order that Mr. Corbett suggested because it is a public hearing tonight. It's not just an open discussion. So if I have anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this matter, now would be the time to do it, and you just need to fill out a speaker card, okay? Thank you.
Well, if you're going to force my hand, okay?
Thank you.
Well, this document, of course, is quite comprehensive. A lot of good points in my estimation, and some that are questionable. As far as questionable, I bring up the transformation of the 4 neighborhoods, the historic neighborhoods of Los Gatos, that are so marvelous and have achieved this present status quo because of the ordinance that's been in effect, okay? A marvelously detailed ordinance. 17 pages, as a matter of fact, in the staff report, which are to be thrown out. Garbage, all of a sudden worthless, and substituted by about 2 pages of generic discussion. Okay, I can't believe it. I can't believe the Historic Design Committee isn't here in full force to complain. So it's down to me, one guy. So I bring that issue to your attention. Do we want to go backwards? And that's what I say this is. This is a loosening up. This is Bud Lortz personified. The loosey-goosey Lortz. He's got to have it all loose so he can manipulate it, okay? Manipulate it. Is that what you want to be a part of? The new Los Gatos, historically, where there's nothing down there other than generic discussion? If you do, we might as well just all go home and forget about it. Let loosey-goosey Lortz and his crew, motley crew, rubber stamp everything, and nobody has to bother coming down here.
Thank you. I see, and I have another speaker. If you would please state your name at the
Yes,
microphone.
my name is Larry Arzi. I live at 18,000 Overlook Road. You know, back in the 90s, I'm speaking on the same subject, number B, the relinquishing responsibility from the Historical Commission. Back in the 90s, we relinquished responsibility to the staff to expedite building permits, to grant approval for minor remodels. This cleared the calendar for the Planning Commission, and in a lot of essences did a good thing. And there certainly was a need for this. I question, though, the need to do this in regards to the Historical Commission. I'm not sure I've heard from anybody that the Historical Commission is overworked or that there are any complaints out there that there's delays for construction. For us to continue to grant more power to staff puts us in a difficult position, because back 8 years ago when we were on the General Plan Commission, a number of us clearly revolted when this subject came up, and we said, we don't trust staff. We just don't trust staff to make the right decision. Watching these meetings, I've watched Michael Caine go berserk at meetings, that when things come back to this commission because staff made such bad decisions on permits. So if it isn't broken, why do we need to fix it? Why do we need to take responsibility away from the Historical Commission? For minor decisions, it should go right through. You know, what's a minor permit? That's sort of, you know, is that removing a turret on a historical building because it leaks? Get rid of it. Is that removing a bay window on a Victorian house and replacing it with sliding doors and putting an asphalt or a cement sidewalk in front of it? Staff, sure, do it. That would not fly for Planning Commission, the Historical Commission. What is a minor permit that staff could approve? You know, is a kiosk a minor permit? Thank you.
Excuse me, hang on. Do we have any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Arzi. Oh, we do have a question. Okay, Mr. Arzi, we have a question from Mr. King.
Are you
Commissioner King.
familiar with the old system, the old words versus the new system, the new words? What about the change bothers you? You've established your belief that there's a change, but what about it specifically bothers you?
I think I expressed that very clearly, that I don't trust staff to make the right decision. If we need to set up a new board to review these things, but there's no reason to take this responsibility away from the Historical Commission at the moment. They're not complaining about it. Who's complaining about it? Why is staff doing this? I don't understand why staff wants more authority and more power to make the decisions in order to expedite, you know, the permits. What is it, 4 or 6 weeks, and you're in front of the Historical Commission?
I was being specific about the removal of any language that would concern. Let's assume I agreed with you.
Yeah.
Now, how would I act upon my agreement?
Well, this is
what language would I put back in that has been?
There is no language at the moment. This is item number B. The staff is requesting that we revise the duties of the Historic Commission. For what reason is I'm asking? There was a reason in the 90s to do it because we were overburdened with permit requests and everybody hated the town. Builders were screaming about us. But there is no reason to do that at this time. So there is no reason to remove any language because B is for you to say good idea, bad idea.
What? No, I'm not. What did you say?
I think are you saying then, Mr. Arce, that what you're saying is the language would just remain as is?
The existing language, yes.
The existing language would remain as is.
We don't need to change it.
That's what I was driving at, because I had similar concerns, and I'm thinking, well, if there's something wrong, then what is the remedy? That's what I was looking for.
There is nothing wrong. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Arce. I have another speaker card, Leonard Pacheco.
Good evening, members of the Commission. Leonard Pacheco, Hernandez Avenue, Los Gatos. The reason I'm here tonight is that I had a chance to look at the staff report and also to skim through the design guidelines. And if we go back in time, I'm also on the Historic Preservation Committee, as you all know. The reason we wanted to have some language taken out was to streamline the process. But as I read the report and as I read the language of the new guidelines, quite frankly, I'm uncomfortable. If the word is abrogate or give up some of the responsibilities that HPC has gotten, I'm a little nervous about doing that. I think the document needs further refinement. So what I'm going to suggest is kicking it back, getting your comments and kicking it back to HPC to go over word for word to make sure there are not any loopholes within the language as I read it. Now, I don't have a gigantic memory, so I can't cite or recite everything that's in the guidelines, but there are some things I think are not quite there. I speak for myself. I had a chance to talk to the chair, and she unfortunately is not able to be here because of some death in the family. And she said, I agree with what you're saying. So both of us, I can tell you, are not comfortable with the final language that's before you on the design guidelines. I hope that clarifies at least my recollection of what HPC did along the process.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. I do have a question for you. So when you read in here, or when I read anyway, in here it talks about, like under Historic Preservation Committee shall, and it talks about architecture and site approval process or the minor residential development, whatever. I see minor a lot. How do you interpret minor?
Well, it's hard to know. I think in the past, staff to HPC has made the determination if it's been minor, and if staff is uncomfortable with an issue, we usually see it. That's one explanation of it, but minor, as it's defined here, could be from 100 square feet or 10 square feet to 500 square feet. That could have a major impact on historic structures. It could literally change the character of what we're trying to preserve. It's historic preservation. It isn't a new application, for example. Okay. And we talk about 360-degree design in all of these projects, and I'm uncomfortable with just if it's visible from the street that it wouldn't have any impact. And I tend to disagree with that because a lot of these properties, or some of these properties, especially in the historic district, back up to an alleyway, which is, kind of a street in a sense. So you do see the back of the houses, either walking in downtown, and even in my neighborhood, you can see the backs of these houses. So if we were to give up reviewing these rear additions, we could change the look and the character of the neighborhood.
So as a follow-up question, have you had a chance to read the staff report?
Yes, I did, and as I say, I'm not...
Well, on page 6, I was a little confused when I was reading it. Maybe you could help clarify this, but on page 6, do you have one in front of you?
I have a copy of the meeting agenda, or the...
That's it.
Is this it? It talks about the minor projects and minor
Town
historic
code minor
projects.
projects, is that on your?
Section 29.20.485 is on my page 6. Is that...
Okay, and then above it, it says town code amendments, minor projects in bold. Is that on your page as well?
Well,
Thank
then,
you.
at the bottom of the
You just
page...
give them one.
Okay, let's give them,
Yeah.
we're getting you one
Make
more.
sure we're on the
Thank
same
you.
page.
The reason I'm asking it is that I read this, and I was actually going to ask staff about this, because I'm wondering if I'm reading the same thing. Town code amendment, minor project.
Okay.
The HPC recommends changes to zoning code regarding the types of minor applications that are forwarded to them for action. And then if you come down, it says, town staff has authority to approve the following types of project. And let's just go to the first bullet, which says residential second-story additions to existing second-story less than 100 square feet in area not visible from the street. And then let's skip down to section 2920-485, administrative procedure for minor historic projects, where it says, if you go to under 3, it says, the following projects will be considered under this administrative procedure. And then A says, additions to an existing second-story residence where the additional area will be 100 square feet or less and is visible from the street.
One is and one isn't.
Right.
I don't know what the explanation is. Maybe it's a typo. I don't know.
It's not a typo. So,
Uh,
was that your, when you saw this at HPC?
Yeah,
is that
it
your
was one of the things that
understanding?
popped out at me. Either it is visible or it isn't visible.
Okay, and would you be comfortable with, this is what you're not comfortable with then? Is that
One
how
of,
I'm
yeah,
to understand?
one
Okay, how about the second one of 450?
Well,
square?
definitely not. That's pretty big size. That can have an impact
Okay.
on the mass and scale of the building, for example.
All right, and what about the third bullet, which is first floor residential additions?
Is that page 7?
Page 6,
Page 6.
on the same, we're
First
still
floor,
on.
okay, first floor residential.
Right.
Do not exceed 20% of existing floor area. Well, you'd have to look at the numbers, I think, in this. It could or could not.
Okay, so that one is a,
But 500 square feet of gross floor area, whichever is less, 500 is pretty big. I mean, a lot of the houses, for example, on this end of Loma Alta are 700 square feet, and it's a house.
that's a whole house.
full-on house.
There you go. That's how you're right. We know people that live in
And we're
750
trying-
square feet.
I think we're trying to preserve and allow for people to expand, but there are good expansions and remodels, and there are bad ones. And I think we all know where the bad ones are.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have now. Commissioner Kane has a question, and then Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Pacheco, I had the same concerns about my pages of the staff report. It talks about 100 square feet for this, 450 square feet for that, and in the book that we've prepared as a draft on the design guidelines, on page 41, it lists both of those bullets, but the first bullet it puts in is new second story. I'm guessing that means that that's consistent with the authority for a DRC, second-story additions exceeding 100, accessories exceeding 450, and new second story. I was on HPC for 2 years. You were the chair. I don't recall. I'm asking you, did DRC have the authority for new second stories, or did HPC?
Well, if it was a historic house, pre-1941, or if it was in one of the historic districts, it came to us.
So then I have...
And then it would go back to DRC with a recommendation from HPC to either redo it, okay it, whatever.
Thank you. I have a question then for staff.
Okay.
Mr. Sutter,
Commissioner
am I reading this correctly? That as written on page 41, these would be the procedures and authorities for DRC, the second bullet and the third bullet being taken from the staff report, but the first bullet implies an entire second story, which is not in the staff report. Am I missing the purpose of that listing?
What's included in the draft guidelines is the current language out of the town code. All right. What's in your staff report is the recommendation that came out of HPC. I want to clarify one thing, which is on the bottom of page 6 under section 292485, the administrative procedure for minor historic projects. Okay. This refers back to the subsequent section on page 7, powers and duties of the HPC. It says that the HPC shall issue approval for minor residential alterations that are not covered under the ANS process or the minor residential process for properties subsequent to section 292485, which is this section on page 6. What this is saying is HPC must review these projects listed on this page. I think a lot of us were reading it in reverse, but it's requiring HPC review for these types of projects. So if you have, in addition to existing second-story residence, and it is visible to a street, it requires HPC review. Or it's greater than 100 square feet, it requires HPC review.
I understand that.
Okay.
I understand that. What then is meant by the list on the bottom of page 41? Are they listing authorities for HPC? Or what is the purpose of defining minor residential development? Who would that come under?
This is the language that's currently in the town code. If you adopt these changes, then this would be changed within the guidelines.
All right. And
this does not reflect the recommendations from HPC. This is the existing language in the town code.
so then let me make sure I understand. If we did adopt it, where would the authority be for approval on an entire new second story? HPC or prior to that?
It's the same. There's no changes to that process. HPC would make a recommendation to the DRC.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Pacheco, this question will be directed to you. It may go to staff, too. I understand the objections, and I'm sympathetic to them. I, too, served on that committee, as you know. But I'm a bit confused on page 6, under Town Code Amendments, Minor Projects, in the last sentence before the bullets, when it says the committee, HPC, is recommending that the town code be modified basically as set forth below, and the 3 bullets. I've heard you, I think, testify that it indeed wouldn't be your recommendation, and that the chair agrees with you. So I'm curious how the HPC is recommending it when I realize that that's 2 of you, but do you have a recollection of the HPC as a committee recommending the 3 bullets?
I'm one of 5 on the committee, and at the time, the whole idea was to move the process of review quickly and smoothly. That was the goal. I don't specifically recall, bullets that we reviewed, it wasn't until I saw the document and the staff report that it all sort of kind of fell into place for me. So I felt uncomfortable with that, quite frankly. But that's my opinion, you know.
Okay, and you're not then arguing with the statement that the committee, as a committee, did make these recommendations?
No, I think the committee understood that they were interested in streamlining the process as much as possible. But what I'm concluding is in that streamlining process, they may have given up some of their responsibilities.
Thank you.
Commissioner King?
So bottom line is, as vice chair of this committee, you're asking for another look at it?
Yes.
And you're saying the chair echoed the same sentiment?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to have, I think Mr. Pacheco remembers that we have two commissioners that were on the committee, and I believe at that time, when this came before HPC, is that right? Commissioner Machichi, you were not on it. Commissioner Rice, were you on it at that time? Commissioner Sayoc, you were. Okay. Would you care to comment on this?
Actually, I was on it. I can't recall the specific. It has come to HPC once last year. And as Mr. Pacheco said, we didn't have specific language. We did talk about the concepts of streamlining and the concept of what is minor. And the conversation, an example that I recall very clearly is if an applicant wanted to add a closet in their back bedroom and no one can see it, something of that nature, is that something that would require a building permit from us? And we said, no, that's something that would be designated as minor. But we didn't go through an exhaustive list of what would be considered minor, and we certainly didn't put numbers or parameters to the best of my knowledge. So I think what, and I do echo Mr. Pacheco's comment of we didn't have specific language, and I think whenever people are making a recommendation, I think it's always helpful when you have the actual in front of you, and I think that's where probably our comfort level, speaking just in consensus from what the group would think. I think all five would probably feel more comfortable, but I wouldn't want to speak for Mr. Commissioner Machichi.
Well, I wasn't there at all when this happened, but I was going to ask staff a question. From your recollection, how did these bullets come about then?
Well,
I mean, I'm not as confused as Commissioner O'Donnell. It says recommended by the HPC. What was the recommendation exactly?
Well, I was at one of the HPC meetings in which the HPC actually reviewed the document, and they discussed in general terms, as Commissioner Sayoc has stated, the kinds of streamlining things they would be interested in pursuing. Now, I wasn't at the meeting in January where it's my understanding HPC actually looked at language. Now, I wasn't at that meeting, but I thought the specific language was presented to HPC at that time.
Commissioner, not Commissioner, Mr. Pacheco, you just heard this. Do you remember if that happened? Were you at that meeting? Did it come back to you?
I was at the meeting. It's not unlikely that the language came before us, but if you've been to those meetings, say it's the end of the meeting, as you've had ends of the meetings, in your own mind, you've thought, well, maybe this language will help streamline it, without recognizing the implications of what was presented to you. So the answer is yes and no.
Yes and no, and we're struggling with the recommending from HPC and then hearing something different from you and via you, Chairman, as well as Commissioner Sayoc. So
we talked, as Commissioner Sayoc said, we talked about a lot of things, a lot of minor and not so minor things, so it got boiled down to, and when you're looking at it, you don't think that, oh, there's something missing from here.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Rice, I believe you had your hand up.
I guess what I thought I had clear, now I'm getting more and more confused. Did HPC have this language in front of them at some point, is what I'm...
That is my understanding. Again, I was not at that meeting, but that's my understanding, is they saw the language and endorsed it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell?
This is not a question, but I just wanted to say something that may be on others' minds, too. If I hear from committee members saying they're very uncomfortable with these changes and they'd like a chance to review them, it seems logical to me that we give them that chance.
I was certainly going to ask Mr. Pacheco, if this body of commissioners up here is uncomfortable as well, would you recommend now that we perhaps send this back to the Historic Preservation for review?
I would strongly recommend that you do that. I mean, it's your choice. But now that we have a document and we have something to look back on, we've had some feedback from others. I've even had a call from somebody who knows I'm on the committee, urging me not to, to review what they saw in the paper and not to give up any responsibilities, because historic preservation is, dear to their hearts.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. Do we have any other questions for this speaker? We don't. Thank you very much for coming down here. We appreciate it. Commissioners, if I feel like I'm coming to the conclusion that I'm uncomfortable, as well as I can feel that you are uncomfortable with this. So since we don't have any more questions, I'm going to close the public hearing at this time. I don't have any more speaker cards, and I think we'll turn it over to us to discuss this, and maybe staff could enlighten us as well. So with that, I've closed the public hearing, and I have Commissioner Kane, and Mr. Cannon, you wanted to comment as well?
Very quickly, just to clarify something that Mr. Davis said about things being stripped out of the ordinances. What actually happened here was we took all the guidelines that were in the ordinances, the historic district ordinances, and they were all essentially the same. We moved them into this document, and then they were adjusted slightly based upon Historic Preservation Committee's experience. Some of those things, the language needed to be changed. So nothing has been stripped out, it's just been moved.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Kane and then Commissioner O'Donnell.
I want to echo Commissioner O'Donnell's sentiments. I want to send back anything that relates to the Historic Preservation Committee. The other thing that Commissioner Chichi wasn't there. Traveling or ill or whatever, we only had one commissioner on the body when this may have taken place. I don't see the great harm in sending this back one more time. One commissioner hasn't seen it. The chair and the vice chair want to take a look at it, so let's just do it.
I would agree with that and second it if that's a motion. But anyway, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just a procedural question. We're going to go through this whole document, and we're going to have a number of things to do. And I guess just from a procedural standpoint, rather than making seriatim motions, maybe what we ought to do is remember the things we want to do and do them. It may be that we won't finish tonight. I don't know. But one part of me says, let's go ahead and do it. But if we make 10 motions, I'm not sure that's perhaps the most expeditious way to do it. But that's a question, not an answer.
Well, one thing that we could consider is that if we sent this portion, this staff report and the portion where it's listed out here back to HPC so they could take a look at it, if this matter does get continued, then we would be able, hopefully, to have their input at that meeting, I would think. I don't know. Would Mr. Suda or Mr. Corr, would you have a recommendation on this?
Well, of course, I'll defer to Mr. Suda's recommendation, but one thought is that you can have your discussion concerning all matters not related to historic preservation. There's a lot of language in the document to discuss. You can continue action ultimately on all items and ask HPC to review just the portions concerning historic preservation at their next meeting and report back to the commission at its continued date or through staff report back, and at that point in time you'll have all of your information together. Hopefully you'll be in a better position to take action.
Okay. All right. How does that sound to commissioners? All right. Okay, we can do that. Okay, then. No more speaker cards. So, well, let's go on. We entrust the Historic Preservation Committee with what they do best, and I certainly will look forward to hearing back from them. So thank you. Okay, members of the commission, let's then look at the document we have in front of us.
Madam Chair?
And, yes, introduction.
I don't know if I heard a motion or if this requires a motion to refer that back.
No,
no.
I was not recommending that a motion be made at this time. Again, I think what Commissioner O'Donnell's thought was a good one. Why don't you complete your discussion for the night and get to wherever you're going to be. At that point, what you can do is make a motion to continue the item for further discussion at another date, and also refer the historic preservation matters to the Historic Preservation Committee to review and advise the commission further at your continued date.
Okay. Did you understand that? All right. So thank you very much, and then we'll let you know. Thank you. All right, so introduction is Chapter 1, and there's several discussion points that we could jump in. So starting down with Commissioner Michichi, if you would just indicate to me what areas, or if any you have that you'd like to talk to. You don't? None? Okay. Commissioner Bourgeois?
You're looking just at this time for major concerns, or?
In areas in Chapter 1.
Chapter 1?
Yes. And I know also, before we begin, I understand that many of us have seen this document in our other subcommittees. However, as a group, we have not had the chance to speak together and discuss this together, and I think that we will enlighten each other with perhaps some thoughts. So I think it's a good thing that we are as thorough as we can be with this. So, okay.
All right, so I'll go through them quickly. On page 6, we're talking about, at the top, item C, areas in average slope of 10% or greater that are outside the hillside area. When we talk about site planning, the second bullet, I know fencing has been a big issue in the hillsides, and we've had a lot of discussion about fencing. Perhaps, we talk about grading, drainage, driveways, and parking as geologic safety. Maybe consider adding fencing to that list. On section 1.2, we talk about...
Is that in, okay, where is that again?
Top of page 6.
Thank you.
The first letter C.
Okay.
The second bullet is site planning.
All right.
Maybe add fencing to that list of site planning elements. 1.2, the purpose. I think this is really good, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with the order, and I don't know if those are in some order of importance, but the second bullet is kind of a streamlining bullet, and I think maybe some of the latter ones, like reinforce the special qualities of the town's visual characteristics, are perhaps a little more important than streamlining the process. So I have a suggested reordering of those. I don't know if that's something others would want to consider, but...
Can I clarify something with staff? Mr. Suda, when someone wants to change an order or add a topic such as Commissioner Bourgeois is stating here, is that going to require the commission to have a consensus on that? Something that small or not? Can we just nod?
Yes.
So when you're thinking...
Unless somebody has an objection to a specific comment, I'm going to take it that it's the consensus of the commission and that is acceptable.
Is that acceptable to you, commissioners? All right. Thank you. Okay, let's go.
So you want me to just go really quickly through my suggested order?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to give a list of numbers 1 through 6 down the existing bullet. So the first bullet would be number 1. The second bullet would be moved to number 5.
Okay.
The third bullet would stay number 3. The fourth would stay 4. The fifth bullet would move up to number 2, and the sixth one would remain 6th. So basically swapping out 2 and 5. That's my suggestion.
Okay, great.
Moving on to page 10, community expectations. I believe it was Barbara Cardillo at the community services representative on General Plan Committee who had this suggestion, because we had a lot of discussion about these sustainability elements. And her suggestion was, and when we get to Section 3, I can talk about that, but one of her suggestions was to take those elements wherever possible and intersperse them in the appropriate places. And I thought, I have several locations throughout the document where those can be highlighted a little better. For example, community expectations. We talk about mature landscaping will be preserved whenever possible. I don't know if it's appropriate there to add drought-tolerant landscaping will be utilized. Some of these kind of sustainable landscaping practices. Something, again, just to kind of take the sustainable elements that are in an appendix and sprinkle them through in the appropriate places. So that was one suggestion there. And my last comment on Chapter 1 is Section 1.7 on page 12. The last sentence there, while not conclusive, substantial weight is given to the recommendations of staff and the DRC in making a determination on the application. I'm a little concerned about that statement in that someone reading it may think that if staff's on board, the commission's on board, and as we know, that's not the case. I just don't want it to artificially have someone's expectations of, although we do give obvious weight to staff's opinion, that almost seems a little misleading to me. So those are my comments on Chapter 1.
All right. Yes, and then what I would like to have happen is, yes, if you have something you'd like to say at the end of someone else saying it, put your hand up and I'll recognize you. Commissioner King. I'm sorry. Why am I doing that tonight?
No idea.
I have no idea either, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Commissioner Bourgeois, in administrative law, we often say the agency is deserving of substantial weight. In other words, it isn't determinative. I find this language, from an administrative law standpoint, to be sort of boilerplate. If we suggest that we don't give staff substantial weight, I don't know why we have staff. It doesn't mean that we're bound by clearly it doesn't mean we're bound by what the staff does, but I would find it to be misleading to suggest that we don't attribute substantial weight to our staff. If I were an applicant, I could be foolish enough, and we've seen this, when staff says, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, they come before us, we know staff said, don't do it, don't do it, and generally speaking, if staff says, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, it's for a very good reason. So I would suggest to you that that language is probably tracking of reality, and so I would object to changing that language as suggested. So I just say that so that I'm of record anyway of saying I don't support that.
And I'm not sure I actually recommended a change. It's a concern to me. I just wanted to bring it up for discussion. And as a non-attorney, substantial weight, I don't know what that means. So, in layman's terms, we have gone against staff's recommendation. So I just don't want it to be misleading to an applicant one way or the other. And maybe it's not, but we should chat about it.
Okay. So I have a hand up, and that's Commissioner King.
Most attorneys don't build houses, so what I'm thinking is rather than mislead the applicant, you could put, it says design excellence, period, and then put in due consideration is given to the recommendation of staff. I always give substantial consideration to staff's recommendations, but, sometimes I disagree. I wouldn't want the applicant to think that because staff said so, that this and that. So put in a respectful comment, due consideration is given to the recommendation of staff and DRC, and we'll let it go.
Could I say something on that?
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I don't know what due consideration means. I can tell you that there is a couple hundred years worth of litigation about what substantial evidence means. So notwithstanding that I'm not a carpenter, I do know something about substantial evidence. I'm sure Mr. Kane, who's not a carpenter or a lawyer, perhaps doesn't know so much about substantial evidence, but knows a lot about due. If he could define for us what due consideration means, maybe we could pioneer new law. But short of that, let me finish. Short of that, when a sentence begins, while not conclusive, normally it lets you know that if you award substantial weight to something, it is not conclusive. We seem to be a little paranoid about staff. And I'm used to that on the other side of the table, but it's a little alarming if it's on this side of the table.
Commissioner Kane, did you want to respond to that?
No, I just wondered if I were a carpenter. No, I'm done.
Do I have any other commissioners that would like to weigh in on this? Commissioner Rice?
I'm comfortable with the language the way it reads.
Commissioner Sayoc, do you have an opinion? Commissioner Michichi?
Especially after hearing Commissioner O'Donnell's comments on it. I don't have any problem with it at all.
Okay. All right, then we will just move on. We're okay. Commissioner,
I don't want to.
Commissioner Kane.
I don't know that we want to debate every line in this thing. Why don't we do what we said we were going to do and just point out what we're concerned with and then come back to it?
Okay. And that
wasn't what I heard.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Rice?
That wasn't what I heard we were going to do. That's my...
Goodness. I just don't want to get into a legal debate over every word in here.
Well, how does it speed it up?
Commissioner O'Donnell?
We raise it now and then go forward and then come back to it. Yes, I have a little difficulty seeing how we save time on that, if that's what the suggestion is.
What I'm hearing from Commissioner Kane is that he is not decided. He'd like to think about it in his mind a little more, but I would like to move forward, and perhaps if the issue is still burning, we can come back to it.
Let me say that any commissioner who wants to revisit something before we're through ought to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Just go by memory.
And that's what I intended with that comment. Okay. So, Commissioner Michichi.
I'm just going to go back to one. There was something I questioned.
Sure.
The FAR .34 or .35?
You're talking about the specific maximum is .35, but it's, of course, a sliding scale based on lot size, so there is no one FAR.
No, I know, but for, say, the 10,000 square foot lot, I thought 3.4 seems to be the number, I recall. If you're saying it's 3.5, fine.
I can look that up.
Just check.
Fine. Commissioner Bourgeois, was that it for, okay. How about Commissioner Rice?
I have nothing else.
Commissioner Sayoc?
I do have two on page 10 under community expectations. I do want to echo Commissioner Bourgeois' comment about drought tolerant, but also I'm wondering if we might want to say drought tolerant and/or native species.
Okay. And would you refresh where that is again?
Community expectations on page 10.
Right. No, I see it, but which one?
Oh, just inclusion of a bullet.
Oh, okay.
On drought tolerant and/or native species for landscaping. And also with regard to adding a bullet on sustainability, one that I just wrote, certainly staff can work with it, is homes will be built containing design strategies that maximize the use of renewable resources, something to that effect.
Okay, Commissioner Rice?
Not to get into wordsmithing, but I have a concern that says will be built, maybe should be built, but will is an imperative as opposed to a option, and it may not always be the best solution or case where you're going to emphasize sustainability.
Okay, do we have a comment? Do we have any response to that?
Couple comments. Just one is just following the way, just following those bullets, all of them say will be. And it's an expectation, and I would think that it's an expectation, and these are guidelines, and so if that's what we're striving for, understanding that a lot of times there are certain circumstances that would prevent an applicant from meeting our ultimate goal.
Commissioner Rice?
I agree, they all do say will be, but often there is room for interpretation in these bullet points. So that's my concern. When you get to sustainability, and then we define sustainability, you're eliminating that wiggle room, so to speak. I mean, this isn't a fall on my sword issue over it, but it just, when I see, like, for example, will be sympathetic to the neighborhood. Well, sympathetic to the neighborhood in and of itself is an interpretation. Sustainability is not open to interpretation. Either, you're going to do something. So that's my concern there.
Commissioner Sayek, go ahead and respond.
The only response I would say is that if we read the document, never in the document do we say that there are certain measures that an applicant has to do. And there are suggestions in Appendix B, suggested measures, just as we do in our hillside design guidelines and standards, but we never ask an applicant, have you done 10 out of these 20, or if these are all measures that we promote and we encourage, yet never do we say you must do. And so again, I see will be as this is an expectation, and we can certainly play with the language, but just in a sentence that we're hoping that sustainability is something that we're achieving for, I don't see something that we're limiting an applicant to do towards.
Commissioner Rice, go.
Well, I would accept, can we add a qualifier, for example, where practical, or to the extent practical, something along those lines, and then I'm fine with it.
Can I just interrupt with what's practical? How do we interpret?
It's the same thing as sympathetic.
Yeah, I know. I was just saying
It's open to interpretation. I'm just trying to leave wiggle room on things where I'm seeing wiggle room already.
Right, I understand. Commissioner
He's getting
O'Donnell,
number one.
I know, I got it. I knew it was right, but I was going to say, Commissioner Sayek, could I have Commissioner O'Donnell? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to suggest that it might expedite this if we get the intention of the parties and let staff take the language. In other words, I understand both commissioners kind of being really compatible here with what they want. And rather than draft the language now and take all that time, we're not going to prove it till it comes back and we look at it. But I think it's fairly clear now what you're both saying, and you're both agreeing with each other. So, but maybe we could save time and not draft it.
I think also that that's an issue that we've grappled with on every one of our subcommittees looking at this, was the language. And it's, so you're right on, so staff.
Yeah, let us take that one back and think about it in the context of all the other green initiatives that are going on throughout the region, throughout the country, and in particular thinking about the Silicon Valley Leadership Group initiative, the Mayors, Managers, and Santa Clara County Cities Association initiative. So let us take that one back, and we'll come back to you with a recommendation on how to handle this.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Let's see, where are we? Commissioner Sayek, that was it. Commissioner Kane? Okay. I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell. You know what, I was thinking when I looked at you that you said that you were, okay. I am so sorry. I'd like to apologize from now until the end of the meeting if I do this again.
Commissioner O'Donnell, why don't you turn your nameplate to the side?
I did, Commissioner Chief.
I know, okay.
I only have one
You may
comment.
put that
I'm going to
down.
say it quickly so we can move on, and it's in agreement. We've been talking about 1.4 in the bullet points, and we've heard, I thought, two good suggestions about drought-tolerant and native species, and I've heard Commissioner Bourgeois talk about one of the committees he was on that drew up the list of native species and planting, and then it never seems to perhaps get implemented. It might be a good idea to put both of those comments that two of our commissioners have already made, and I would just second it. That's all. That's the only comment I have.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kane.
I agree with all that's been said. On page 6, a question for Mr. Sudit so that I'm sure I'm understanding this. Under paragraph C, the first bullet says constraints analysis, site selection, excluding the visibility, site ridgeline protection. Is that a practical exclusion? Am I missing something? Why would we exclude that?
Because none of the areas that are in the R1 district would be on a ridgeline by definition.
Well, that is probably where I got in trouble, by definition, because I remember the house on the knoll that was just short of being in hillside, and it was 36 feet up, and it looked like 100 because it was on top of a knoll, and it just blocked out that whole area. That's what I was thinking when I questioned why we would exclude it.
Right, the town council has identified their protected ridgelines in the community. All those protected ridgelines are not in an area zoned R1.
That's good. Thank you.
Commissioner Rice?
Please.
Oh, I'm sorry, you were still on. Thank you, Commissioner.
Did you want to comment on that?
No, I had something else, but go ahead if you're still
Go ahead,
going.
Commissioner King.
I just passed the 225, and I wanted to say that I love 98% of this. This is exciting. This is going to be so helpful in the future. Thank you, staff. Thank you, committees. Thank you, Mr. Cannon. This is a lovely book. On page 12, I had the same concern about the word substantial. Might be misleading to an applicant. I just didn't know why it was necessary. We all always give substantial due consideration to the staff reports. That's it on section 1.
Okay. I think my comments,
Chair?
I would be in, Commissioner Rice, I'm sorry, you did have your hand up.
That's okay. I just wanted to go back, and Commissioner, it was brought up, and it dawned on me, would there not be a reason to include the plant lists, et cetera, as an additional appendix to this book? Does that make sense? Thanks.
Okay. I have, my comments for introduction are, I think it's how to read your neighborhood, and actually it does go throughout. It's also based on the book in the back, on the workbook of how to read your neighborhood. But, and I know we had this conversation at the General Plan Committee, but the immediate neighborhood, to me, I believe that definition could be expanded. Right now, it's 2 up and 2 down and 5 across. And where I would want it expanded, I just would like to get, your opinion about this, is on the rear neighbors, because sometimes those neighbors are affected by shadows and privacy issues. And so for me to offset that right now would streamline our process somewhat. If somebody who was planning on building a home, renovating a home, adding to a home, knew that they had to be concerned and take into consideration their rear neighbors as well as the neighbors beside them, we could offset some problems. So what's your feeling about that? Commissioner Mattici?
Well, my comment, I can remember spending hours on this in various committees, and
Right.
there seemed to be a consensus of most of the group that I worked with anyway, but and this had an intent of saying, I think was more the front of the house, if it was, they would try to put a 2-story in because the ones downstream were 2-story. We didn't see that as being compatible. And compatibility to us meant the immediate area.
Well, this is...
And again, it says more is given to the immediate area. It doesn't exclude saying other areas, if you read it.
It doesn't exclude it, but it doesn't include it, and this is really to read your neighborhood.
No, it says the greatest attention will be given to these.
Right.
It doesn't say that you can't expand it.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right.
I don't intend to be a lawyer, Commissioner O'Donnell, but that's the way I read it.
Commissioner
so.
Mattici. Okay. Commissioner Mattici, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Do we have any other comments on that for expansion of it at all? To, in parentheses, consider the entire... Commissioner Bourgeois?
Well, I think I would be opposed to including it in some formal way because I think it can cut both ways. When you have really different neighborhoods backing up to each other, it cuts both ways. But I do think that second to last paragraph says common sense should be used when applying the diagram below to a specific site context. We maybe could just add a clause to that sentence saying including privacy and rear neighbors. I don't know. It seems like
something like that.
Something. I don't know. I'm just
I would be
throwing out a
more
suggestion.
comfortable with that. Okay. Commissioner Rice and then Commissioner King.
If we expand it, I want to be real careful. I mean, I think
Have to
we're already going to, we already
Right.
see, like we saw out on Englewood, somebody 7 houses down and 4 over that had a legitimate concern, fine.
Exactly.
But then it'll come it'll get appealed
I was
anyway.
trying- What I was
So-
trying to do was offset it, that's why.
Yeah, so I
So
just-
that they would pay attention, that's all. Streamline the process somewhat. Commissioner Kane?
I understand what you're saying. I'm so in love with 225. I don't want to mess with it at all. Moreover, when we talk about visibility, there's now some lovely visibility language in here. We have shadow language. We have hillside view language. I understand what you're saying. I don't know if it's needed, but if you can draft a sentence or something, when we can put it in later when we make a final document.
Okay, I liked where Commissioner Bourgeois was going with that sentence, I think. It was just, could that be done? So it's not, I don't want to belabor this point, but I do.
We can draft it up and bring it back to you.
Okay,
for
thank you.
For a final decision.
All right, thank you. Okay, does anyone else have any more comments about Chapter 1? We're going to move on? No. Chapter 2. Shall we go down this way? And I'll go last? Okay, Commissioner King?
On page 13, we can, get into attitudes, values, and beliefs. The last sentence in the first section called Neighborhood Patterns, the emphasis is on neighborhood compatibility with the recognition that some change is inevitable and desirable. No, it's not. I think change is inevitable, conflict is inevitable, conflict is not bad, et cetera, but to say that it's desirable, just put my hackles up on to preserve and to protect, which is our job. I don't know if we need that there. That's a consideration. In the margins, which Mr. Cannon described as being there separate for a purpose, I love these, the clarity that they provide without messing up your main body text. When you talk about those neighborhoods, Mr. Suda, subdivisions, informal, urban, semi-rural, the Bellwood section is a giant chunk of town, and it's not mentioned in here at all. And I think we ought to recognize our loved neighbors to the east, and either under informal, urban, or semi-rural, just put in the Bellwood section. There's two sections to Bellwood, so one could go one place, one could go the other. But when you mention all these other neighborhoods, I think you should put in the Bellwood section in which is also East Los Gatos, or much of it.
Then do you want to add, I'm sorry,
Oh, Commissioner Rice?
then you got the other part of town out at Old Adobe and Bicknell, and...
Well, you can cover that in your turn.
Well,
I just
okay,
think
wait a
Bellwood
minute.
is just not in here and ought to be.
Could I just suggest, do we think we need to increase this list?
No reason not to. Put in both sections.
And, if we do, we could also increase it to include Almond Grove, even though we have a whole historic section. But it gives a flavor in the beginning of this booklet about the kinds of neighborhood types we have. Commissioner Rice? We could go on for pages on that.
Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know what the definition of is, or...
I'm going to hear that tonight.
I think we're trying to give examples, and most of these examples, or all of these examples, are relatively to the central core of Los Gatos. If we want to go out to all the neighborhoods, then you got to pretty much include all the neighborhoods. And I'd just rather let people recognize, oh, mine looks like that one,
Right.
even if it's not specifically mentioned.
I think that the bolded in this same lavender box, I think that the bolded topics, traditional neighborhoods, subdivisions, informal, urban, and semi-rural, cover what we're talking about, cover what you're concerned about, Commissioner Kane, as well as the Adobe area, Commissioner Rice. Old Adobe, thank you. I think that's here, often sloping lots, widely varying house designs. Now, maybe if you wanted to add that in the italics area, would that make you more comfortable? I think that's what he was talking about. Add it in there?
It's in the margin. That's
Add it in the
I don't want to put words in.
Oh, okay, you want to add it there?
I don't want to add it at all.
All right, fine.
If that's a no, here's a yes. We got 5 other votes. I think other neighborhoods should be mentioned.
And
That's all.
my only comment was, if we're going to add one section of town, then, because that is a kind of a section unto itself, then you should add the other section that's unto itself.
We have to be careful not to make enemies of not mentioning a neighborhood, though. Commissioner King?
And on page 20, 252, design sensitivity to adjacent neighbors, the paragraph talks about the views, the sky, the sun, all the things that we've mentioned before that are important. I was wondering if we needed, Mr. Suda, to add and any in-house views of the neighbor's house. Now, I wrote that early when I went through this the first time, looking into a house is a view that I would protect. But we now have, when I said earlier, we have visibility language, that's what I meant. We now have some language to prevent windows from going up that look into people's existing bedrooms and bathrooms and that kind of thing. So maybe it's not needed here, but it wouldn't hurt to repeat it. That's my comment on.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell?
The only comment I have is that in neighborhood patterns, the last sentence, I perhaps read it differently. When it says the emphasis on neighborhood compatibility with the recognition that some change is inevitable, and I take it to mean, and when it says and desirable, it means that change, which is inevitable, could be desirable. And I think that's obvious, and if our duty here is to make the town better, sometimes that means to change things. And therefore, some change will be inevitable, and hopefully the changes which are inevitable, we will do our best to make them desirable. So I'm only saying what our role is not to cast the town in concrete, but in those instances where we can make it better, we ought to do that.
Okay, are you thinking that that just is a wordsmithing issue?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we could look at that last sentence. It seems to be bothering a few of us. Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on. Commissioner Sayoc?
Okay, page 14, it's more of a question rather than a comment. Under 2.21, there's an exception under the diagram where it says where adjacent lots have a non-conforming setback, applicant may have the option of conforming to the required zoning setback. So the question is, do they have the option or they must? So can an applicant, do they have the option of having a non-conforming setback if adjacent neighbors have it?
There is a provision of the zoning code that where your neighborhood, where your neighboring houses have a different setback than is standard, this is only for the front setback, then you can use the average of your adjoining setbacks.
Even if it's non-conforming?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And then my only comment to neighborhood patterns is on page 20, the purple landscaping, what would you call that, the box? There's no reference, again, to native species and or drought-tolerant landscaping, and so I'd like a bullet to include that. And then one other question I have, the second bullet up where you list under the tree ordinance summary, the second bullet, it lists 4 trees, blue oak, black oak, California buckeye, Pacific madrone. And I just didn't understand why those 4 trees were singled out. Are those, just by being there, they're protected, or?
This is directly out of the ordinance, so. It's directly out of the ordinance, so if that's the only reason that it's called out there. Isn't it?
No, this is an error.
Okay.
It's any tree over 4 inches that's on the site involved in a development proposal is protected,
So
unless
can
it's
we
a
just-
fruit or nut tree.
Can we just strike those 4 then? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any more?
That's it.
Okay, Commissioner Bourgeois, you had your hand up. Did you want to comment on it? It's over. Commissioner Rice?
I was going to go back to 2.52 for just a second on page 20. The only thing I had put there in my own notes was privacy issues, and maybe it addresses what you were talking about, Commissioner. Are you Kane or O'Donnell?
All right.
Glasses, oh, no, it doesn't work either. So something in there about privacy. I don't know how, maybe what you were headed towards was that direction.
It's covered clearly elsewhere, but privacy might cover just as a bullet in there. Thank you.
We could make a reference to, the privacy is addressed in Chapter 3.
I understand
We
that.
could make a reference to link the 2 sections together.
That's good.
Okay, terrific. Commissioner Bourgeois?
I only have one major comment, but I just want to comment on couple that have been previously stated. The inevitable and desirable sentence, I'm okay with that. And I would like to second Commissioner Sayak's recommendation about again, I had that note for native and drought-tolerant landscaping. But my only comment is on page 15, in section 2.3, which is form and mass. And right away, 2.3.1, we go right into design two-story houses in predominantly one-story neighborhoods to blend with the smaller homes. And I understand what we're trying to do here, but I think our first goal would be keep a one-story house. If it's a predominantly one-story house neighborhood, we would prefer a one-story house for neighborhood compatibility. But the first bullet under the form and mass says, try and make it look okay. So I don't know where we get at that, but I think our first priority under form and mass should be keep it similar to the surrounding neighborhood. So that's my one main comment on section 2.
Yes, how would we, yes.
I think that's a good point. It is covered elsewhere, but it probably should be here also. Just for reference, on page 23, when it talks about height and bulk at front and side setbacks, the very first bullet point says two-story houses may not be appropriate for every neighborhood. For neighborhoods dominated by one-story homes, an effort should be made to limit the house to one story in height or to accommodate the second floor space within the roof form, as is common in the Craftsman style. So it's covered there, but I think the point is, maybe we need to reference it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that also is happening in other places in this document where it's written one place and not another. So, okay. Commissioner Lucici.
On page 15, again, I just want to check something because I was under the belief that where you say tall fences should be avoided on corner lots, I was under the impression that you're limited to like 3 feet because of line of view with cars.
Yeah, if you're in that site triangle, it is, but outside of that...
Outside the triangle, it isn't, yeah.
Right.
Okay. I'm not sure that's clear there.
As a follow-up to that, because that was my issue as well, could I just ask, it says to keep side yard fences low or limit their extent. Is there, 3 to 6 feet? Is there should a number be put in there or not?
There's a fence ordinance.
Because there is a fence ordinance.
There's not a fence ordinance per se, but there is a zoning code provision. It's typically limited to 6 feet unless an exception is granted in which the two parties have to agree to have a taller fence.
So when you said low, or when this was written as low, what did they have in mind? Was there a number in mind, a height level in mind?
No, it has the illustration there, the photograph at the upper right, that sort of is what the intent was. But we could put a number in there, but it was really relying on judgment that it becomes a friendly, compatible with the front doors of other homes.
So actually, and the illustration is there. Use illustration as example, something like that. Commissioner Kane?
Let's just do that, Mr. Cannon, if we can, put a number on it. And it would help the social reader who's reading this and trying to design a house to know exactly what that number is. I don't know what the height of low is. So if you gave them a range and contrasted the two, that would probably be very helpful.
That was my issue, I believe. Let me just check. Oh, I did have a question for Mr. Cannon. On page 24, under some techniques include for building design, step down to one-story elements near the side setback, provide substantial side setbacks. Can we use, I really like the use of photographs and illustrations. Would that be a place to put more illustrations or not? Or are they here on the side? Is that what those are? Can you? And I like the one at the bottom that really shows what to do to mitigate the visual height of the sidewalls. I'm wondering if a photograph like that could be made bigger, so it's a little more prominent.
Which photograph?
The one at the bottom, the Craftsman at the bottom. I mean, that shows really basically what you're talking about, or what we're hoping for.
Yeah, it certainly can. This is like, trying to put another cup of water in a full bucket.
Yeah, I
So,
know.
But that's,
But
we'll
it's
just
important.
deal with that. Yeah.
But it's important.
Just as a comment, and again, this is always the problem with these things, of trying to cover everything so it's clear, but not repeat things from section to section. Back on page 17, there is a little diagram at the bottom of these three little houses talking about the relationship of second-story additions to existing homes, so.
To chapter 3. 3.3. We are on to 3.1, which is building design. And Commissioner Matici, shall we start with you?
Yeah, I really didn't, had a couple of the
Commissioner Bourgeois?
Is this 3.1 or is this all of chapter?
It's all of chapter 3,
Okay. Here we go.
beginning with 3.1.
And again, there will be a mechanism for us to follow up with like little typos and stuff. We can just email staff afterwards, or?
You can email it. You can email it to us, or you can have us make a copy of your marked up version if you like.
Okay. I have a couple questions about pictures that I wasn't quite sure if they were a pro or a con. And I know it's very difficult, and 98% of these pictures are fantastic, and they really tell the story. But on page 25, talking about garages, and I really tried to look at these in light of our study session on DRC process, and really talking about what it is when we see a house we don't like. What is the essence of that? And I really spent some time thinking about that, and garages and driveways, I really think are very, very important. And so under 3.4.1, we have this picture of this house. It says, limiting the width of garages. Well, it doesn't look like they limited the width of that garage. It's one, it's not broken up. It's all one color. And setting the back, but they did set it back. So it seems like it's half pro, half con. So I wasn't quite sure. That was just a little confusing to me, because it's a very prominent color. It's all one massive door, but it is set back a little bit. So that one was a little fuzzy for me.
Just on a light side, I remember we went through this a little bit on the general plan committee, and we jokingly said maybe we should put the little smiley face next to the good ones
Yeah.
downtown, at least for the bad ones.
Right, we could do that.
A little thumb up. And
Yeah.
The next one was page 28, and I like the graphics on the left about the dormers, but I'm wondering if the captions of those should maybe go above the figure, and the avoid, or maybe the text should just be a little bigger, because the text beneath those about which ones you're supposed to avoid and which ones you're supposed to, they kind of get lost because the pictures are so nice. And then if you look at the photo on the right, it's at an oblique angle, and so I can't tell if it's 50% of the width or not. It looks like it could be. I'm assuming this is one that we like, but to my eye, it looks almost like that top picture that is an avoid.
Okay.
And Commissioner Rice?
Just
comment
maybe
on that?
Yeah, to comment on that. You've got those three drawings in the margin. Why not just use the whole margin all the way to the bottom of the page, and that way the text will be closer to the picture? That might solve your
Spacing them out a little bit.
more.
All right.
And I would tag on that I agree with Commissioner Bourgeois about the photograph matching. It looks almost, the photograph on the top on page 28, looks like it's almost matching the avoid the large gable to the left of it. So, nice house though.
Yeah.
O'Donnell.
Question on, if I understood Commissioner Bourgeois, he didn't have an objection to the shed dormer illustration, but was thinking that the photograph was confusing. Maybe I'm missing something, but that shed dormer, the comment says gable dormers, singular aggregate of multiple dormers, should rarely exceed 50% of the width of the roof. Shed dormers can be wider. That particular shed dormer in the illustration looks like it's I don't know, 80% of that roof. And so if you look at the photograph, it looks very similar to the drawing. And I guess if you're concerned...
I wasn't concerned. I was concerned about the large gable dormer at the top.
Oh, okay.
That's the one that it was a little ambiguous to me as to whether that was a...
Yeah, no, I see your point.
Okay,
That's how
it's not that big a deal, but...
Yeah, I read it that way as well. Well, it is a big deal when you consider who's reading this book for the first time.
Yeah.
We're used to looking at it. Others are not.
Continuing on,
Yes, please.
page 31, under section 3.7.5, it says avoid estate home style windows, e.g. tall arched windows. I just wondered, that would be a good thing to have a picture of for me, because I don't know what that looks like. So, and I don't know if you have it, but just a comment.
I think it's a good example. We need an example of that, and so I would put that in as well. I would agree with that.
Next page 32, 3.8.1, use high-quality materials. Again, here is another opportunity to include some of the sustainability issues, and we could maybe have a bullet that says, use sustainable materials where possible, something like that. Yeah, that where possible is for you, Steve.
On that same page, can I comment on that as well? I'll just jump in on that since we're talking about it. If I may, I have a question about why architectural copper is, well, I have two questions on it, but why is that having its own box all to itself when I thought that it says in here to discourage copper?
Yeah, the only answer I can give you is I couldn't find another place to put it. It was something staff asked to have put in here, and so it was just a matter of finding a spot for it.
Because it makes it look
Yeah, I understand.
important. So if it's going to be,
Strike the word generally.
yeah, I think we
It's-
strike the word generally out or leave that. Do you see what I mean?
Which word is the word generally?
The use of
Oh, yeah.
architectural copper is generally discouraged.
And the reason generally is in there, and it's because I don't know enough about this, but I've talked to enough other architects that some say, oh, we've got these coatings that it's just perfectly all right and it doesn't cause a problem, and other environmentalists say, oh, yes, it does, or it maybe doesn't right now, but it may be in 10 years it's going to cause a problem. So that's why generally is in there.
So, Commissioner,
Page 33.
okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Page 33, section 3.9. That just seems a little awkward to me to have a major heading, and then the only thing under it is see page 52. Yeah. And I don't know what to do about that. That just struck me as a little awkward.
And it was essentially just a way not to repeat all that stuff. And
Right.
I don't know. We'll think about that.
But it seems, I just know in documents, usually you have the text up front, and then if you're going to refer to it, you use the latter section to refer to a previous section. Because if you're reading the document front to back, you have it the first time, and then if you're going to reference it, you do it in the latter section, not the other way around. So,
Good comment.
and then my major one is on section 3.12, page 37. I know we had a lot of discussion about this in General Plan Committee, and I thought we had some consensus at the last one, but there's a lot of discussion at these meetings, and things get lost in translation, I guess. And I know we agreed to push a lot of the detail into the appendix, but this still seems very like it's minimizing this section. This really looks, it's 4 paragraphs. There's no lavender box. There's no pictures. There's no, and I believe my suggestion at General Plan, I still think it's a good one, is to take those concepts that are the major headings and subheadings in Appendix D and make those guidelines, much like we did in Section 2.1, so that, someone who's not going to be flipping back to the appendix to look at all the detail can still see what those guiding principles are that we're looking for. And then maybe even we have other resources in the appendix, and maybe have that as a lavender box, because we have that earlier on with the architectural, the guides that they should use. So that, to me, would like give this section a little more weight and importance. So those are my comments.
Commissioner, I do remember that conversation now, and we will, I remember that being the consensus of the committee as well.
Okay. Commissioner Rice.
I had hoped somebody else before me would open up this Pandora's box, but page 23, dealing with the seller policy. We continually struggle with houses that push right up against the FAR and and then add a cellar on top of it. And I had kind of hoped that this document would come with something that, and I don't know how to say it, and I don't know if we can say it, that says, don't go right to 6,000 square feet and then throw in a cellar and say you're reducing visible bulk and mass. And I don't know how to say that. But I think, we have a cellar policy. It says here, it's designed to, is to provide hidden square footage in lieu of visible mass. That's true, but every time one comes to us that pushes right up against either the 6,000 square feet or the maximum FAR and adds, a 2,000 square foot cellar, we're going, but you didn't reduce bulk and mass by adding a cellar. So I don't know how we address that.
The GPC did spend quite a bit of time discussing this issue over several meetings, I think it was, and one of the things, I think there's two sentences the GPC added here. One is to point out that, yes, under the cellar policy, cellar area is excluded from the FAR calculation, but goes on to say, however, if any part of that cellar is above grade, we're going to include that in the evaluation of bulk and mass, and further, you need to demonstrate now how your design is reducing the overall bulk and mass, how it is utilizing the cellar in lieu of that visible mass. So it tries to build on the existing cellar policy, take it a couple steps further, is what the GPC was trying to do there. I lost where I was going with the rest of it, but I do recall the consensus on the GPC was to expand some of that language in the italics there.
Well, then I'd probably look to the members of the commission that are on the GPC, and are you comfortable that this says what we want it to say?
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I think the words are there. They might be better rearranged a little bit, because it does say what you wanted to say, but it may not be prominent enough. It says, the intent set forth in the general plan is to provide hidden square footage in lieu of visible mass, which I hear you saying you really want to make that a point. And then it goes on to the second paragraph, which says, in the spirit of that intent, which may be a little weak. So I think it's all there, and I guess I'm wondering if it would satisfy you if this were arranged so that when you start reading it, and perhaps even before you define it, you say what our policy is. So the first thing out of the box when the person reads that, they say, in lieu of visible mass, and maybe, I don't know where you put the definition, maybe there, maybe later, and then you get in, when you say in the spirit of that intent, I'm not sure that's strong enough. Maybe we ought to be saying, in reviewing applications for cellar space, we are going to pay attention, obviously, to the intent set forth in the general plan. So I think if you took all this language and sharpened it somewhat, I think it would address the issues you're raising.
Is staff comfortable? And the second part of that is maybe a couple of sentences around there has to be a reasonable trade-off or offset of the excess grading or dirt removal that is required for a cellar. I remember the house up on Foster Road where we were 6,000 square feet above and 2,500 square feet below, and Commissioner Bourgeois' concern was I can't get behind the cellar because even though it meets all the criteria, there's a lot of dirt that's got to be removed because of it. So if there's a way to tie in, yeah, we're going to let you have a cellar and let you remove a whole bunch of dirt, but then the mass has got to come down. I said I knew I was opening a kind of a Pandora's box. Then we've got to, there's got to be some give and take. I want it to be pretty clear that we're going to look very, very critically at a house that comes before us with that's maxing out the FAR and adding a big cellar, because you're trying to get both ends of the goodies, and I just that's not what I read the intent of the cellar policy to be.
Commissioner Vichichi.
Let me comment, because I was on GPC for 3 years of discussing this, and I'm sure others were on it before, but a bunch of examples are given, and there's always give and take on it, Steve. If they put a cellar totally under the landscape, then I look for bulk and mass as it applies across. It doesn't really matter what the FAR is for me. In other words, if the cellar is totally buried, which takes a lot of grading, then it doesn't contribute to the bulk of the house. Right. The bulk of the house is measured on its own then. Once they start moving up to that allowable 4 feet and not counting the floor area, then I have a concern with bulk and mass, because now it becomes more bulky to me. So the same circumstance, put the same house level with the existing ground and put a cellar under it, I don't have a problem. You move it up 3 feet, and I can have a problem with that, regardless of the FAR, right?
Yeah, but I still have a problem with.
Yes.
I still have a problem with that, in that to get that cellar all the way down, they're moving a lot of dirt, which may not be desirable. So that's a
separate issue, though. That's a grading issue that you can address as a grading issue.
I understand that, and I'm just saying I'd like to try and tie all this in when we start talking about the cellar policy. I don't know how to do it. I apologize for that. I tried to come up with words, but I can't.
Okay, Commissioner King?
I agree totally, and I don't know how to do it either, Steve, but maybe we have a review of other communities, Mr. Suter, to find out how they've coped with this. Somebody somewhere may have a better mousetrap, because we had a developer stand right there and say, I've got my 6,000 square foot house, I've dug my 32,000 square foot cellar, it's right under the house, it's legal, and what are you going to do about it? And I said, but it says in lieu of visible mass. And he said, well, the visible mass was the other 1,000 foot I was going to put on top of the 6. So if we can find a way to, this is written by angels with golden hearts and full intentions, but there's some folks who are going to take advantage of that language, and I agree with Commissioner Rice on everything he said.
Okay. I want to say something.
I was just going to make a suggestion as to how to address that issue, because we're all sensitive to that issue. One can argue that it doesn't really belong here because we can cover it under grading. But you could put it here. And if you put it, for example, in the last paragraph, when it concludes by saying with the site's immediate neighborhood, we could say, and's the wrong word, but consideration will be given to any other environmental trade-offs, which, when you get to grading, that's an environmental trade-off. So rather than simply restrict it to truck traffic and all that, if we say consideration will also be given to the other environmental considerations, the guy, if I'm coming in and looking at that, I say, what does that mean? So I'm going to talk to the staff, and they're going to say, well, if you've got this problem with, a lot of trucks coming, they're going to pay attention to that. So that is one, I'm just saying that's a possible way to address the issue, and it doesn't take a lot of words. So
I think this goes into the category of, we'll take this one back, we'll think about where and how to wordsmith this one, and if there should be applied in multiple sections, we'll bring you back some options on that.
Okay.
One quick comment. Mr. Sutter, we did talk about ratios. Ratios comes out of in my head that if there was so many feet in the cellar, then there could only be so many feet on the second floor, so that we didn't have a 2-story house with a 4-foot stick-out cellar. Some sort of mathematics to define in lieu of visible mass. So, thank you.
When I read this policy here, I thought it needed to have its own, some kind of a special box and maybe not be italicized like that. I think it's important. And I also questioned where the placement of it should be on the page, so I would agree with that. I think in the spirit of putting it here, though, it's really referring to design in lieu of visible mass and not all the particulars about grading, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why it didn't bother me so much. And then it says where to look for the seller policy. So, but I understand what you're saying, and the staff is going to address it, and I think that's going to take care of it. And the only thing I would add is if there was a way for us to put some kind of an illustration in about seller, since this could be their first and only time an applicant or homeowner ever sees a book. Maybe it could be an addendum to how to read your neighborhood, I don't know. Anyway.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes, Commissioner Wright?
I'd also like to probably see this seller policy in design set off as its own bullet point, because we are seeing it more and more and more, and I think it's important enough to have its own heading.
Because it affects design, as we know. Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you. All right. Commissioner Rice, did you have another one? You're finished. Well, they're good. Commissioner Sayoc.
Okay, so today I do concur with all the comments that the previous commissioners have raised, but I do feel strongly about one, and that's on page 20, no, I'm sorry, not page 20, the architectural copper on page 32. I understand the trade-offs that Mr. Cannon had just mentioned to us, that architects like using it, however, environmentalists hate it. And I'm going to say, I'm one of those people that hate copper in the water. And I could go on and on about the reasons why, and I think staff has done a good job of explaining why copper should be discouraged. So first off, I would just remove generally. I mean, I'd prefer to put strongly discouraged, but I'd be perfectly happy with just saying use of architectural copper is discouraged. But what I've also done is I've also talked with other communities in the area to talk about how they mitigate it if they don't prohibit the use of copper. And I'd like to include a sentence or two to the effect that after the last sentence where it says major uses of architectural copper in residential construction are roofs, gutters, and copper-treated composite shingles, perhaps something to the effect of, should architectural copper be used in residential construction, mitigation measures will be included in the conditions of approval. And it could be may, it could be will, but I think copper is such a significant issue in our waterways that cannot be treated, that I just can't just leave it alone.
Okay.
And I'll leave it to community development to work out the mitigation measures with the applicant.
And I see heads nodding, so I think that we'll send that back to you, Mr. Suda. Thank you. Okay, is that it for you?
That was it?
Commissioner Kane? Oh! I was all prepared. I am so sorry. My mea culpas, I've said it all there. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I have nothing further.
I have never done that this year. This is the only day. I guess I am.
You're on a roll.
I'm on a big roll. Sorry. And Commissioner Kane?
Pardon me? My points have been covered, except for to extend the discussion on 3.12, sustainable design. With the exception of the second paragraph on page 37, I think all of the text of that section and all of the text of Appendix D are in fact identical to the Hillside Standards and Guidelines discussion of design for sustainability and its reference to its Appendix B. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. If the language is fine, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, as someone said earlier, that's fine. But given that it's identical to language that was written perhaps 5 years ago, I was just wondering if we should turn loose our green scientists to perhaps look at this and see if there have been technological advances, other concepts, or different kinds of web pages referenced in Appendix D, different kinds of materials. It's been 5 years, and green technology and sustainability have been on a sharp slope of increasing their importance. Discoveries are being made, and the language in our new document is identical to the language in our document from 5 years ago. And, you know, when we were discussing this language in the Hillside Guidelines, we were thinking that the next go-round of the Hillside Guidelines, that this new concept, new for a lot of people, of sustainability should get a little bit of teeth. Should have a lot of mom's words in it, like you should do this, you ought to do that, because we have no teeth. And where's the meat? In our new document, there's just no meat. It says sustainable design, and it talks, and it's narrative, and I read it in English, I understand it, and when I was done reading it, I wrote down, so what? There's nothing in here that says I have to do anything. I was wondering about having some direction or some standards or some guidelines, as we have in our old Hillside Guidelines document, or maybe a reference to the LEED certification, is that right, John? That's being developed for domestic houses, for residences, that we could put something in there like, you know, as they forthcome will be, and already they're available for guidelines in building. There's just no teeth. And if we did have some teeth, and if the document wants to lead the way on sustainability, require some aspects of sustainability to be put into our new homes, and then perhaps some incentive. Randy, someplace we've had a discussion about if we did require LEED certification or some of these sustainability features, that we might put in some incentives to make it worthwhile for the builder to adopt them. So whereas I'm excited, first time I saw the sustainability in the Hillside Guidelines, there's no teeth. I mean, when it says, it tells it what it is, and it says standards, and it says none. And then it says guidelines, and that's a wish list. Well, in our new document, we don't even have that. So, you know, I'm so happy that we've got sustainability inside residential design guidelines, finally, but I think we ought to put in some meat and say, you need to do this, you need to do that, and in fact, if you do this, this is what we'll do for you.
Okay. Mr. Suda, did you want to comment?
Well, this was discussed several times at the GPC also, and there was some talk about strengthening the language, talk about where the language should go. There was a brief discussion of how far we wanted to take this topic in the context of the residential design guidelines. The council's directed that staff study the issue of sustainability in depth as part of the general plan update. That's one of the 4 major topics for the general plan update, is going to be sustainability and ways to reduce our carbon footprint, et cetera. And I think the consensus of the GPC was that this was the proper way to handle this at this time in the residential design guidelines, that this will be studied in more detail as part of the general plan update, and possibly coming out of that may be stronger requirements. Maybe there will certainly be a discussion over mandatory requirements, be discussion over requiring Build It Green certification or not, but those types of strategies would be discussed in the general plan update context, not in the residential design guidelines.
I understand what you said. I didn't know that. I'm not on GPC, and I appreciate it. But since we now know what's coming, shades of things to come, maybe we could put a little stronger verb, a little, you really need to think about this, and it should not only be in residential, it should definitely be in the hillside as well. If, in fact, that's the direction we're coming, I don't see the harm in being more assertive about, we'd like to see these things done. Right now, it's a wish list, and certain folks will totally ignore it.
As you'll recall earlier, we're coming back to you with ways to increase the prominence of these sustainability requirements, inserting them throughout the document, not just in the appendix. And we can look at referencing some of those efforts that are currently going on. In particular for residential design, I think referencing the Build It Green standards, those guidelines is really that approach is being endorsed by more and more cities. That document is easy to find. It's certainly a much cheaper alternative than requiring LEED certification on a single-family home, things like that. So I think a reference to their documentation, their website, and some explanation of what that process is all about can be included in this document.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Commissioner Bourgeois?
Just a quick comment. I'd like to echo what Mr. Suda said about the general plan and the general plan committee and where that was kind of, put off, the decision was kind of put off to that process. And I appreciate what you're going to come back with. And one of my little notes was that Build It Green is not one of the websites that's listed. I think it should be added and more prominent, maybe one of the first one, yeah. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I do want to take a little break, but would you like to press on or take a little break? We need to take a little break, all right. We're going to take a little break. We'll be back in 5 or 6 minutes. Thank you. somebody call the meeting back to order? We have finished our discussion, I believe, and we will be waiting for those changes to come back to us, as well as hearing back from Historic on the single and two-family design, residential design guidelines. Okay, so for that, we're going to go on now to continued other business, which would be the election of chairperson and vice chairperson. Oh, what?
Make a motion to do something here?
Oh, we need a motion on that? I'm sorry. I thought we, that was understood. Okay. All right.
And we're going to have input in
Okay.
the
So we are going to have the input, moving this along, I know. Well, I'm telling you. With that, I need a motion then to continue this. Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I move that we continue the matter we are now considering. For two reasons. One, we want to allow enough time for the Historical Preservation Committee to consider what is before us in that area and get back to us. And two, when we can get a date certain, then we can fit those two things together. So my motion will be dependent upon staff. Maybe staff can suggest now a date to which we could continue this.
I think the next HPC meeting will be March 20th, so, March 19th, excuse me. So I would suggest April 23rd for Planning Commission.
All right, well, then I would move that we continue this matter until April 23rd, and that we request that the Historical Preservation Committee report back to us prior to that meeting and not later than the Friday before in any comments they may have. That's not to preclude somebody from showing up and talking to us, but it would be helpful if they have any written comments that they would come in our package.
Did you say April 23rd?
April 23rd.
Oh.
That's what I understand we're talking about.
Yes.
Well, March 19th is when you're going to...
No, that's when the
That's
HPC
when
will
HPC
consider.
Yeah, okay, so a month later, you're going to... Okay.
So that's the motion.
Okay. All right, I have a motion to continue and from Commissioner O'Donnell and a second from Commissioner Kane. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay, motion carries 7-0. All right, so now for continued other business is our election of our chairperson and vice chairperson for March 2008 to February 28th, 2009. And this item was continued from December 12th, 2007. And before I do that, I wanted to say that this is my last meeting as chairperson, and it's been an honor to serve. And I wanted to thank my commissioners for their respect and cooperation and their dedication this year, as well as I'd like to thank the staff for all of their support and hard work as well. And also thanks to Ruth and Jim, who are our videographers, who make cinematography look easy. And they also make, I know, my director, no. They also work real hard to make the rest of us look good.
It's a statue to be
So,
holding when
excuse
she's
me.
doing this.
Right. And I hope for our audiences, and I hope we all do, since this is the first year that this Planning Commission has been filmed for Los Gatos, I hope that the audience that have tuned in to watch us, aside from being here in the chambers with us, found this planning process interesting and informative, and understand that the guidelines and principles that we adhere to and uphold in this town in our decisions are what keep our community the great community it is and the one that we love. And I hope that my successor will find this position, with all of its responsibilities, as rewarding as I have. And with that, I would like to take the chairman's prerogative and nominate for chairman for next year Commissioner Michael Kane. And I will need a second.
Second.
And I have a second from Commissioner Bourgeois. And so with that, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? 1. Motion carries 6-1. All right, and now I will entertain a motion for vice chair. Commissioner Bourgeois?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner O'Donnell for vice chair.
Okay, and do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, a second is from, I saw 2 hands go up. I'll give it to Commissioner Kane, all right? All in favor, say aye. Aye. And opposed? None. Motion carries 7-0. So, congratulations to both of you, and much luck. And with that, we have a report, do we, from the director? We do not. And do we have any commission matters? Commissioner Kane.
Just a reminder to staff, at the last meeting, we talked about the re-examination of the demolition policy, and that we are looking for formal written guidance on this issue, in particular if in fact there was a resolution. And second, that Commissioner Bourgeois brought up the approved tree list possibly not being adhered to. Trees that were approved were not being used, trees that were disapproved are being used, and just a reminder to all of us that these are on our list for our next meeting.
Thank you very much. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I have two things I want to say. One, I want to thank you for putting up with me in the prior year. I know I didn't make your job easier. I also think I should correct the record insofar as you have confused me repeatedly with this older gentleman. I called to your attention earlier that I kept calling you the wrong name many times early on, and so I'd hate to think you did this to even out, but it probably didn't. So thank you very much for what you've done for us.
All right. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you. And with that, meeting is adjourned.
I guess